I went back to a study published almost 6 years ago where we looked at parallel walled implants placed in single rooted extraction sites and tried to determine if a correlation existed between insertion torque and ISQ. And when I searched the literature, the only study looking at extraction sites and trying to gauge whether a correlation existed or not was in this really well played out cadaver study, where they looked at implants going into extraction sites in cadaver mandibles and measured the insertion torque and the ISQ at various depths. So the higher up the implant is positioned coronally, the greater portion of that implant body is not in contact with bone, at least on the facial aspect. And what they found was what you would probably expect, is that as that implant was placed deeper and deeper, the stability here increased because there was more implant to bone contact. And the greater that that defect was in a vertical dimension, the lower the both ISQ and insertion torque value were. So let's look at an example with one of these patients where we were removing a fractured lateral incisor, parallel walled implant, very low insertion torque according to some of 20 Newton centimeters. But look at the ISQ of 74, 71. So if we're looking strictly as at a predictor of osseointegration and successful treatment, one may say, well, 20 Newton centimeters is not a very stable implant. But then if you look at the axial stability, you may change your mind in terms of what you would expect for success. So this patient was not immediately temporized. We performed our augmentation procedures with the dual zone graft and a dermal allograft with a stock healing abutment. And at 8 weeks, we took off that healing abutment, and our ISQ values that were relatively high to begin with went up just a blip. So certainly this gives us encouraging signs that we are trending in the right direction, that this implant is very stable. We can't measure insertion torque again, and I don't think it would be ethical to try to reverse torque on really any patient anymore when we have a non-invasive method of quantifying the progress of implant stability. And so you can see here we go to the final restoration, which is screw retained. So what were we looking at here? Well, we were looking at the insertion torque and ISQ in extraction sites. And there's a significant difference there because the extraction socket implants are not in contact with bone along their entire length. So insertion torque is really a measurement of rotational stability. Once that implant is seated to its final depth and final position, we record the maximum amount of energy it required, and we cannot repeat this. Where ISQ, or implant stability quotient, we're looking at the stiffness not only of the implant proper, but the stiffness of that implant and bone interface, which is certainly dependent on how long is the implant, how wide is the implant, how much surface area of that fixture is in contact with bone. And we also get an idea in terms of stiffness of the surrounding bone, and the more cortical bone we have at the crest, the greater the stability should be. Now we're looking at extraction sockets, and this measures axial stability, not rotational stability. Is the implant wobbling when subjected to lateral forces? And again, this is non-invasive, and we can repeat this throughout treatment if we want to know if we're ready to restore the implant, or we should let the implant continue integrating, or do we have a failed implant and we need to remove it and start treatment over. And all of you familiar with the ISQ technology have seen different charts like this, where we see that the higher the stability in terms of ISQ reading, the more aggressive, I guess you could use that term, we can be when it comes to loading implants, or at least temporizing implants out of occlusion. And I've gone through the evolution of using the Ostel Mentor. The IDX was kind of like a neat little iPad, and it could connect online. And now what we're using is the Beacon, which is wonderful. It's small, it's convenient, it's wireless. And if you just want to record your readings, you attach your smart peg and you point the Beacon at the smart peg and you get your readings. But what I have started doing is using Ostel Connect and connecting that beacon via Bluetooth to our desktop in the operatories. And we can enter all different kinds of patient data, and we can find our patients for follow-up measurements very easily. And for those of you who haven't seen it, I would strongly recommend you watch Will Martin's webinar on the Ostel.com site, because he does a beautiful job explaining how he's used this Ostel Connect in all different ways that you wouldn't imagine. And it's really been a very nice addition to what we're doing.